This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Glynn Tonsor, K-State livestock economist, kicks off the show with the cattle market update. He mentions macroeconomic issues that are impacting the cattle market and how meat is having its moment. Keeping the show rolling is Beth Hinshaw and Amy Collins with Kansas 4-H as they discuss activities youth and 4-Hers have the opportunity to participate in this summer. K-State crop entomologist Jeff Whitworth wraps up today's show as he explains how thrips, ticks, and mosquitoes could be bothering people. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Monday show with a cattle market update from K-State livestock economist Glynn Tonsor. Glynn, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Shelby.
Glynn, what are we seeing in the cattle market?
So we're wrapping up June here. Pretty positive tone. I'm going to give some examples of some pretty high numbers, but narrowly there was examples of flat to up this past week, depending on what number you reference here in a minute. So USDA AMS called the fed cattle market on Friday, basically flat, maybe up $1, depending on which market, 236 for the 5 market average. And for quick reference, those are up, $30 compared to not too long ago. So we are at elevated fed cattle prices. AMS called feeder cattle markets here in Kansas mixed, lower volume. There was examples of $10 up, but I would just say lower volume in general was the main thread. 2 lots I referenced here was a 193 head lot that weighed just below 800 pounds, went for $326 in the Pratt market. A lot of 201 head weighing 928 pounds went for $306, and both of those would be sort of on par with the last couple of weeks. When you look over at the board, so CME August contracts were down this past week, so they closed Friday lower than the Friday before. August live cattle was about $210, down $2 on the week, and August feeder cattle was at $302, down about $4 on the week. So there was a small disconnect between the board and cash, and particularly on fed cattle, that's not necessarily new. There's been more strength in the cash fed cattle market than on the board for some time now. That's showing up in the form of stronger basis and so forth than we historically have, and we can break that down more as we need to. But in a lot of ways, I think those that are in the business of live trading cattle have been a little bit more bullish on cattle prices the last few months than those that are trading quote-unquote on paper via CME. Those trends don't stay apart forever. You have settlement at the end of contracts and so forth that come to play, but it's sort of more of the same this past week of what we had recently. When you flip over to the cutout, now here's a big positive that occurred this past week, was choice closed Friday at $391, which is up from $378 the prior Friday. So that's a pretty large weekly increase. Now, it's worth noting we are at larger values, so in percentage terms, that's not as big as it would have been 2 years ago, just because everything in the system is quite a bit higher. But regardless, that stands out as a notable increase in choice value. And select box cutout came in at $377 on Friday, up $363, so up $14 compared to the prior Friday. So you have a mixed trends across these that we're laying out is flat, the board was down a little bit, and then box beef was way up. Those distinct signals won't play out week after week, right, to be determined what carries the day going forward. And I think the developments in the Middle East are probably going to have something to say with that. You and I are doing this recording before the markets open on Monday. We need to watch exactly how the markets respond to that, and I'll talk more about that here in just a second.
In terms of the Middle East, what are you seeing macroeconomically?
Keep in mind historically, and I'm 44 to peg this comment as, I'm not a historian, but I'm getting old enough I could reflect on some of these things, is disruptions in the Middle East often, there's lots of macroeconomic concerns and humanitarian concerns, of course, that come with that, but disruptions in oil is historically one of the things that gets watched closely, and it's not just for the U.S. here for a moment, is globally, the Middle East is a major net exporter of oil products, and there's multiple straits that commerce is done, so waterways through the Middle East, pathways from Europe to Asia, oil coming out of the Middle East and so forth, that are sort of always at risk. But anytime you have aspects of war that are being developed, we get more concerned about that. And oil prices tend to be the first thing we see in the broader commodity equity market that responds to that. So If you and I were doing this recording 48 hours ago, I would have been telling you oil was looking like it was going to be up 5% when Monday started. Right now, as we speak, it doesn't look like it's going to be up as much as that. But I'm timestamping these comments for a reason is I think it's quite volatile what the next announcements are and what the next developments are and so forth. Obviously, I hope humanitarian in particular, things calm down, like settlements can go forward and we get peace, those kind of things I feel like I need to add in here. But as the economist trying to comment on the cattle market, watching what happens in the oil complex, I think will spill over into broader discussions about, are we going to slow global economic growth with higher oil prices? Are we going to slow global economic growth with less commerce, building on added trade uncertainty we already had before this? How does the Federal Reserve react to this? Because there's already elevated discussions about if and when and how much they'll lower the rates. What that might mean if we have higher oil prices and now they're more worried about inflation, might slow their interest in dropping rates. So I'm not trying to make this complicated for our listeners, Shelby. I'm just saying there's been a lot of things, like literally in the last 48, 72 hours, that potentially could disrupt what we're talking about here.
And Glenn, when you're in talking about the cattle market, always mentioning meat demand and your meat demand monitor coming out soon, but not quite ready.
Correct. So you and I are talking here at the end of June. We have 3 to 5 more days of data collection, so I do not have June numbers to reference, but they're going to come out during the 4th of July kind of holiday, so watch for those because I won't be on next week. Quick reminder, in May, we saw both retail and food service demand decline. And in the past, we saw some retail strength and food service weakness. So I certainly hope that we have some retail recovery show up in the June data. And better yet, we had food service recovery as well. If you want one reason for that hope, the higher cutout values I referenced earlier would be consistent with somebody, right, is paying up more for beef than they were before. And hopefully that's a signal of stronger demand we got going on there. But as I said, I don't have the June data to report out yet. We need to watch that. We are in the heart of grilling season, and hopefully that spills over into stronger retail demand because that's where historically we go to the grocery store, buy our steaks and our pork chops and our chicken breasts and everything that's brought our meat discussion and take them home and grill. Usually we see that in form of higher retail demand. Hopefully we see that play out in June.
However, you do have something else for us to talk about, and it's something from your In the Cattle Markets that you wanted to share with our listeners.
Yeah, so for those that aren't familiar with this is kind of a shout-out to a different series. So, we have several colleagues that are on this rotation that you interview weekly that contribute to the series called In the Cattle Markets, and it is based at LMIC, so Livestock Marketing Information Center out in Denver. And each week, I think there's 6 of us now on this rotation, writes, a page and a half kind of thing of what we see going on in the markets, and then there's a what the market numbers themselves are kind of piece. I'm bringing it up because I think it's timely and it summarizes in my eyes, there's some bias because I was the author, but is the 2 main forces that are at play. And I titled this 2 weeks ago, Meat is Having a Moment. And this is the positive part of this, is meat is having a moment in the sense that, per the MDM, as you brought up, we're actually seeing a decline in the prevalence of vegan vegetarian diets. We're seeing more interest in meat protein in general. Now, this so far is not unique to beef and cattle, but more broader, the meat complex. Just interest in having meat protein in your diet is growing here in 2025. Some of that has to do with a more active, younger cohort, physical fitness, quote-unquote, demands more protein, and meat is benefiting from that. Those of us that watch probably too much TV see protein referenced in commercials more than we did a few years ago, so there's a broader protein discussion going on here. I'm highlighting that because there's a strong tone of that. I referenced in this piece about 2 weeks ago when I was at World Pork Expo, very, euphoria there because hog prices are up. There's a new pork campaign. Taste what pork can do for you is what the campaign is. But it was part of this broader, meat is having a moment. I'm going to San Diego for the summer cattle industry meetings here in about 10 days, and I anticipate some similar euphoria there because cattle prices are higher and, beef is in. So meat is having a moment is the phrase I'm using. But I end my comments in the cattle markets point with the conflicting phrase or the conflicting force is the macroeconomic uncertainty. So the first 4 to 6 months of 2025 have had elevated uncertainty about what global trade might be, particularly tariffs and what that does to those relations, what domestic unemployment and inflation rates might be. And as we just talked about, just in the last 48, 72 hours, we have the elevated risk out of the Middle East. So put all of those in this broader kind of quote-unquote outside of the meat and livestock space, macroeconomic arena. Uncertainty is very elevated over there. And as an economist, I have to point out that it's not sufficient to want meat protein. That's a very good thing, right? The industry should want that to be developing, but a necessary and sufficient condition includes being able to pay for it, right? So there's this capacity, right? What is your income? What's your disposable income? Your net savings, all those kind of things are tied to this broader macroeconomic story. And I've been pleasantly surprised at the strength of meat demand despite pretty elevated macroeconomic uncertainty in 2025. And I can definitely come across as Dr. Bear being concerned about these things that haven't, played out, pushing back on, meat and livestock prices throughout the whole chain as much as we might have expected. That's a great thing for the meat and livestock industry. It just says demand has held up more than we anticipated. But it is my job to say we can't take that for granted. So there are two forces at play here, right? The public wants meat, hence this phrase I'm intentionally repeating a lot. Meat is having a moment. But we can't forget the macroeconomic part of this and the relevance of recent news stories. I mean, first and foremost, we're human, so the humanitarian part we got to keep in mind. But when it gets to on the ranch kind of considerations, is consumer demand does impact cattle prices. The example I'll use is 2024 cattle prices would have been at least 10% lower, fed and feeder cattle just for a moment here, if we did not have consumer demand growth. So understanding the strength of consumer demand does matter on the ranch. That's why I'm always infusing these points, and we need to watch these net developments.
So when you say meat is having its moment, obviously we focus on beef, and you mentioned pork. But for chicken also, do we see all of those meats having their moment?
Yeah, I would argue all three meats are in lots of ways. So total meat consumption per person, right, has grown a lot in the last 20 years. And that itself is not a demand measure because it says nothing about the price. It's what we produce in net of trade, how much is being consumed. But the average American consumes well over 20 pounds of meat, beef, pork, and chicken, more today than they did 20 years ago. And that's primarily been led by a volume growth by chicken. The consumer expenditure growth part of that story, beef has led in. And this distinction is really important because even though we might be consuming similar pounds of beef than we were in recent past, the amount being paid for those pounds is much higher, which leads to more dollars in the industry, which leads to those higher cattle prices that we've been talking about earlier. So the distinction between demand and consumption is always important, but I would argue all three meats are quote-unquote in, and they're part of this much broader discussion that the public wants meat protein.
Glynn, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thanks for having me on, Shelby.
That was K-State livestock economist Glynn Tonsor. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show talking about some summer activities that 4-Hers could be taking part in or other people that are wanting to be involved in their community. And then to talk about it, we're joined by Program Coordinator for Kansas 4-H, Amy Collins, and Kansas 4-H Youth Development Specialist, Beth Hinshaw. Amy, Beth, thank you both so much for taking the time to join us today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having us.
Amy, first wanting to talk about a project that Kansas 4-H is partnering with another business to make happen, and what is that project?
Yeah, Kansas 4-H has partnered with New Boston Creative Group, a marketing firm here in Manhattan. They have started a new initiative called Higher Paths, where they research and video different careers. So kids 4th through 8th grade can explore different careers they might be interested in Kansas. I think the whole idea behind Higher Paths was keeping great Kansas kids in Kansas. So we're looking at careers available within our state, and that was a natural partnership for us here at Kansas 4-H because we look at a lot of career readiness within all of our 4-H projects. So to give you a little idea of what this contest is about, it is a competition that allows members to learn about a career and then produce a video to create their own episode for the series Cool Careers. So 4-H members will select a profession within one of their 4-H projects in which they're enrolled for the current year. 4-H members will film, edit, and publish an original video about 4 to 10 minutes in length about a professional working in this field or career. And these videos should be geared towards youth 4th through 8th grade to inspire and introduce them to the exciting opportunities of the selected field of work. 4-H members will use different creative assets that Higher Paths has provided for them. So title pages and music and different things like that are already available for them to use. Entries can be submitted by an individual or a small group. So that means that they don't have to work alone if they don't want to. Up to 4 4-H members can join together to create a video. At least 1 or 2 members must be enrolled in the specific project. So they don't all have to be enrolled in the same project, which is kind of nice. And then the other good thing about this is that adults may assist the 4-H youth, but should allow the 4-H members to do a majority of the work. We know that this can seem a little overwhelming to some of the kids, but we want them to explore and kind of figure out how to interview someone within this profession and use the technology they already have on hand, like their smartphones and different things. And we realize that they might need some help from mom or dad or a teacher along the way, and that's perfectly fine. As long as the kids are learning throughout the process to submit the finished product, we're happy with that.
And when is the deadline for getting these videos in?
The deadline is August 1st. We will be running these videos at the Kansas State Fair in September, and there will be a panel of judges that will evaluate the final product for originality, creative, and execution. So even though it doesn't look as professional as maybe some of the cool career videos that are already out there, that's not what we're really concerned about. We just want them to kind of try their hand at it and practice and see what they can come up with.
If people want to find out more information, how can they do that?
For sure. They need to go to kansas4h.org. It's on the very front page of our website.
Beth, wanting to chat with you some about some big 4-H events that take place during the summer months.
Yes, it is so hard to believe that it's almost county fair season in Kansas, but it is. Our young people have been enrolled since last fall, working on their projects. Amy had such a great explanation of what they're doing, or, what's possible with projects. And the one thing that we know that happens when kids enroll in projects is they're very possibly going to find their spark, something that's going to be something they love to do for the rest of their lives. And many of those things even work into a career for them as well. So when we get to county fair time, they have the opportunity to really showcase what it is that they've learned that year in their project. And what we know about county fairs and kids is they love it when their community comes out to see what they've done. So one of my suggestions is that everybody contact their local extension office to know when your county fair is going to happen and where and what that schedule looks like, so that you can be sure and be there and take part and see what's going on.
And also a great reminder to maybe start on some of those projects as county fair is slowly getting closer.
Yes, we're hoping that a lot of those projects have been started, but we also know that there's a lot of motivation the closer that we do get to the local fair. And, if you can make it to your local fair, you're going to see hundreds of projects, and they represent all of the different things that Kansas 4-H does, from science, technology, engineering, and math type projects, foods and nutrition, certainly livestock, horse shows, poultry, and rabbits. And then in addition, we have rockets. Photography is a very popular project in Kansas as well. And then also arts, visual arts type things. And that's just some of them.
And as we're focused a little bit towards youth, also wanting to make the mention that adults can also be involved in 4-H.
Yeah, you're right. We could not do 4-H without the partnership of adults. And those include our registered volunteers, who are our club leaders and our project leaders. And then our 4-H parents certainly have a great role in supporting the 4-H program as well. So when you come to the fair, you're going to see lots of young people, but you're going to see lots of adults who it's really important that those young people are successful and they want to be there to support them as well.
If someone is willing to support the youth of Kansas 4-H, what's your recommendation for them?
I think checking in with your local extension office to find out what the opportunities are. We are always looking for volunteers to work in our club programs and with our 4-H projects, but also some of the things that we do in schools. Like, we would love the expertise of some folks to help us with that as well.
As you both look forward into the summer for Kansas 4-H and 4-H youth, what makes you excited?
Oh, I think the buzz of activity in summer is just really exciting. We just finished Discovery Days at the first part of June and had wonderful young people on campus learning all kinds of things from instructors and, really working on that life and career readiness. And I think, now that we're into June, it's just go, getting ready for local fairs and maybe some leadership opportunities that young people will have from maybe some local day camps or other activities.
Yeah, I think something that excites me is that our projects are always evolving and changing. So we've had a couple revamps over the last year or so. We've introduced vet science as a project. We've taken home environment up to interior design and architecture. So we've been working with faculty in the architecture department to revamp that project, which is going well. Also, buymanship is now shopping in style. And I think that goes along with looking at sustainability of the clothing industry and how fast fashion is playing a role in that and how maybe we can be better consumers of our clothing. And then our engineering and technology, we see all sorts of new and innovative ways to do projects. We have a lot of 3D printed projects, rocketry. We're looking at uncrewed aerial systems. Kids are coming up with some really interesting and innovative projects. So that's always fun to see what's going to show up at the county fair and then maybe the state fair.
Any final thoughts for our listeners?
If your family's not involved in 4-H, but you think you might want to be, going to your county fair is a great opportunity to see all those different projects all in one place and talk to people who are involved locally as well. So I feel like the county fair is also a really wonderful recruitment opportunity for us.
Beth, Amy, I appreciate you both taking the time to join us today.
Thank you.
That was Program Coordinator for Kansas 4-H, Amy Collins, and Kansas 4-H Youth Development Specialist, Beth Hinshaw. As always, you can find out more information about Kansas 4-H by going to kansas4h.org. I will link it in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Monday show talking about ticks and insects with K-State crop entomologist Jeff Whitworth. Jeff, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, sure. My pleasure. Anytime.
Jeff, you've been receiving a lot of questions about ticks, and why is that?
Well, I've been getting not so many questions. I've been getting so many complaints about ticks. Ticks, mosquitoes, and you know what? Thrips. In the last week, those are all three biting insects, and well, ticks aren't insects, but they're close enough. And so when everybody's out and about, and especially the next week or 2 weeks when everybody's out harvesting wheat, I thought it'd be a good idea just to remind everybody about these three biters. First of all, the thrips. Thrips, they're not a normal biting pest, but at certain times of the year, just as the wheat starts senescing or drying down, they move. They move to someplace else to feed on, and they can come into your house if you live in the country or, beside town someplace, or if you happen to be out in swarms. They're little tiny, kind of a yellowish, tannish thing. You can hardly see them, but you can feel them. When they bite, they don't transmit any diseases. They don't cause any problems. other than they're just a real nuisance. And I was just out last week, and they were a real nuisance because the wheat was drying down. So the other two biters that I'm talking about are the mosquitoes. We just talked about those earlier in the week. Those insects are not going away. As we get more water puddling around, ponding around, whatever you want to call it, we're going to see more and more mosquitoes. Keep that in mind. And remember, the mosquitoes are going to continue to be a problem as long as there's standing water around. And the last biter that has just in the last week or two really caused people to call me and complain are ticks. There apparently are a lot of ticks around. Again, they kind of go with the flow of the humidity and the warm weather. But what I'm seeing is the guys are out looking at their irrigation systems, and they're hanging out around the edge of the field in the weedy areas, or they're getting ready to cut their wheat, or in some cases they are cutting their wheat and they're hanging out in the weedy areas around the field or the weedy areas that go through the field. That's primarily where the ticks are. Ticks have to have a blood meal. So they're going to be really, really good at finding a host, whether you or a rat or a mouse. They'll even utilize snakes or birds, whatever they can get. But if you're out, fixing the combine or the tractor right beside the field, you're going to be exposed, and you're going to be a really good, attractive host for all the ticks in the neighborhood. Ticks have to have a blood meal. They're just like mosquitoes. They have to have a blood meal in order to have fertile eggs. So in the case of ticks, they'll feed a little bit. They're really small. When they first hatch out of eggs, that's one of their problems. They're really small when they first hatch from eggs. You generally don't even notice them. Sometimes they're called seed ticks, but they still have to have a blood meal. So they'll feed on you for a little while, then they'll drop off. Then they'll molt, they'll change, they'll grow a little bit in the soil, and then they'll come back up. They're looking for another blood meal. So there'll be 3 or 4 different instances where different stages, different sizes of ticks will be actively looking for a blood meal. And as I said, their lives depend upon it. So they're very, very efficient or effective at finding a host. Keep that in mind. Now, we always tell you, make sure you wear long sleeve shirts, make sure you have, long pants, keep your pants tucked inside your boots. That will help. That might help. But as far as ticks go, it's not going to help a lot. DEET, any insect repellent or tick or mosquito repellent with DEET will help also. But you got to keep refreshing that. My advice as far as ticks go, just don't hang out in the weedy parts of the field as much as possible, and make sure you look over each other or yourself every time when you go in, because the little small ones especially can get embedded, and they're really hard to find. And they can be a source of an infection, or sometimes they can actually vector a disease. So just be aware when you're out cutting wheat and servicing your soybean and your corn fields. Around the edges is where you're going to pick up lots of ticks, especially now with the high humidity.
Jeff, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
My pleasure, anytime.
That was K-State crop entomologist Jeff Whitworth. That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.